So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen, introduce myself and the other speakers, and then we'll get started with the webinar. So welcome everybody. Just a little sort of housekeeping at the start. We are recording the session, so you will all receive a recording of today's session. If you have a question to ask and you don't want to be on the recording, then please just let us know. That's not a problem. What we can do afterwards is we can just crop that out, or we can crop the Q&A section out, or just your question out. Or if you don't feel comfortable coming off the camera or off mute to ask a question, then at any point during the webinar, feel free to pop a message in the chat box, which is at the bottom of the screen, and I'll just read those out at the end, and I can just read that out for you. So if you don't want to be recorded, then just do that. If you're happy with that, then just take yourself off mute and ask, but we'll do all the questions in the Q&A session at the end. So let me just share my screen and get the webinar up. So welcome to our webinar today. We're going to be talking about weight loss, changing your behavior and keeping those habits up for life. So the things that we're going to be going through today are nutrition, hypnotherapy, and then we're going to be talking about medical weight loss at the end. So just to quickly introduce us, my name is Katie. I am the registered nutritionist at Andra Health. And then we've got Bethan, who is our clinical hypnotherapist at Andra Health. And then at the end, we'll be passing you over to Dr. Harriet, who is from the Calla Clinic, and she'll be talking about medical weight loss. So the nutrition side from me. So when it comes to weight loss, the market is huge, and there are so many supplements that you can buy. It's endless. You can just find loads and loads and loads. Anything from raspberry ketones to detox teas, which generally just tend to be laxatives, and hugely restrictive diets, which cut out huge food group, lots of food groups from your diet, and can be really, really restrictive. And most people that we see for weight loss in the clinic have tried at least a few of those things. And the story is always the same, that they never work, or the person thinks that they work during the time that they did it, but then they regained the weight again after. To us, that means that it didn't work, because something that works is something that you then sustain for life. So if you've lost weight on a diet and regained the weight afterwards, then as far as we're concerned, that doesn't work. So scientifically, the only way to lose weight is to be in what we call a negative energy balance. And what we mean by that is the amount of energy that you are taking in, so the amount of energy that you are consuming through food, is smaller than the amount of energy that you are expending. So that's the amount of energy that you are using up throughout the day. And therefore, because what you're putting in is smaller than what you're using up, you are then going to have to draw on your energy stores within your body to provide you with that energy. We can do that via two things. We can do that via a calorie deficit, so eating less food, and we can also do it by increasing your energy expenditure, which in general comes through increasing exercise or physical activity. Or of course, we can do a combination of the two. So before we talk about the framework of weight loss, I just wanted to go over a little bit about tracking progress and what that should look like. So lots of people track progress through scale weight, and that can be a really useful tool over a long period of time. However, from 1 week to the next, it doesn't really tell us very much, or even within the space of around 4 weeks, it doesn't tell us that much. Scale weight can change due to a whole number of reasons, and that can be things like changes in water retention, changes in muscle mass. Menstrual cycle in women can cause changes to weight, whether you've eaten, whether you've been to the toilet, and then finally changes in fat mass will also cause changes in weight. But as we can see, that change in fat mass is one of many things that can cause a difference in scale weight. So because the scale doesn't tell us whether that weight loss has come from fat loss or whether it's been from one of those other reasons, it's really important to measure progress via a variety of different ways. Over a long period of time, so if somebody has lost, for example, a stone over 3 months, then yes, we can say that that person will have had significant fat loss, because that change is too big to be accounted for by those other reasons that we've just been through. However, there still may have been some muscle loss, and it's very difficult to tell. So we want to do these other things as well. So one of those is measurements, and taking, how many inches your waist is, or your thighs, or your upper arms, or things like that, and see how that changes. Progress photos can be such a powerful tool for using. Sometimes you can take a photo and you can just do that on your phone in front of your mirror in your bra and pants, and just keep it for yourself. You never have to show it to anybody. And then a month later or 2 months later, take the same photo in the same clothes, and sometimes the change is huge. And obviously you look at yourself every single day and don't realize sometimes just how much difference there can be. So that's a really good one to do as well. And we can also look at tracking fitness. So that might be how many steps you do every day. So you may have been only ever doing 5,000 steps a day, and you may increase that to 10,000 steps every day. And that's a really good way to track an improvement in your health. And you might look at markers like when you're exercising. So the distance that you're able to run, it might be that you could only run 2 kilometers without stopping before, and now you can run 5 kilometers. So that would be a really good marker that your fitness is improving as well, and that your overall health is improving. And then finally, we can look at health markers. So things like blood pressure and cholesterol and things like that, especially if you're somebody who's been advised to lose weight because you have high blood pressure or because you have high cholesterol, then that's another way that we can monitor your progress. So scale weight, yes, we do want to measure it, but we want to be measuring a range of things as well. So the weight loss framework. Now, we don't have time to, I just say we don't have time to go over all of the weight loss framework today. It's, it takes a long time to go through it all in detail. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over the key points and the most important points today. Obviously, it's not in as much detail as we would go through in an appointment, but it'll be the main most important things. So the first one kind of seems obvious, and we hear it all the time. Make sure that you're basing your meals around fruit and veg. However, whilst most people do know that they should be basing their meals around fruit and veg, if we actually ask people, why do you think that's important? A lot of people can't actually tell us why they're basing their meals around fruit and veg. Just let somebody in. So we feel that it's really, really important to educate you on why you should be doing things, because if we educate you on why you're doing it and why it's important, we find that people want to make those changes much more. And when they're in that position where they need to make a decision, they make the healthier decision, and they want to make those choices because they understand why they're doing it. So firstly, not only is fruit and veg high in fiber, this is really, really important for our gut health. So just to very, very briefly go over, our gut microbiome is the name that is given to all of the bacteria and fungi and viruses that live within our digestive tract, which sounds disgusting, but we need them, and they are extremely important for our health for a whole number of reasons. So when we eat fiber, there are some types of fiber that we can't actually digest, but our gut microbiome can. And essentially, when we eat those types of fiber, we are feeding our gut microbiome and keeping it healthy. We call those types of fiber prebiotics. And when we eat plenty of fruit and veg in abundance, we get lots of those prebiotic fibers, and that feeds our gut microbiome and it keeps it really healthy. Secondly, fruit and veg tends to be pretty low in calories for the volume that it provides, which means that it can add bulk to meals, increase the volume of the food that you're eating, and help you to feel full and satisfied afterwards. Also, that fiber that's in the food is going to slow down the rate that you're digesting it. It takes your body longer to digest because of the presence of the fiber. Therefore, the food stays in your digestive tract for longer, and therefore keeps you feeling fuller in between meals until the next one. And finally, fruit and veg is what we call nutrient dense food. And this means that they contain a high level of essential nutrients per gram. So that's things like vitamins and minerals that are really essential for our health. And when we're eating in a calorie deficit, so when we're putting less food in than we need, which is going to help us to lose weight, sometimes we can put ourselves at risk of nutrient deficiencies, which makes sense because we're putting less in than we need. So making sure that we're eating plenty of fruit and veg means that we're decreasing our risk of getting any nutrient deficiencies or anything like that. So another principle is increasing your protein intake. And we want to do this for a number of reasons. So firstly, protein is the most energy expensive nutrient to break down. What we mean by that is that it takes your body quite a lot of time and effort to break down protein. In fact, around 10% of the calories in protein are used up simply in digesting and absorbing that protein. Now, the reason why that's really important is because it takes a long time to digest. It's very difficult to digest. And therefore, again, it stays in your digestive system for longer. And that helps to keep us fuller in between meals. So you will feel much more satiated after eating a high protein meal. And you'll stay feeling fuller for much longer after eating a high protein meal than a meal that isn't high in protein. Protein is also really important for muscle repair. So as mentioned, it's usually a good idea to exercise alongside trying to lose weight via a calorie deficit. And it's important that we get enough protein in our diet to repair all of those muscles after we've done workouts. And finally, eating a high protein diet is important for our metabolism. So when you lose weight, your body needs to draw on your energy stores to provide energy. When it does that, it has two choices. It can either draw on your fat stores to provide that energy, or it can draw on your protein stores to provide that energy. Your protein stores is your skeletal muscle. And what we don't want to happen is for your body to go to your skeletal muscle and break down muscle to provide energy. We want that weight loss to come from the fat stores instead. The way that we can try and help that to happen is to eat a high protein diet. If we're eating protein in breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and we're also having some protein in our snacks, then we're constantly signaling to the body, put this protein into the muscle, because that's where we store our protein. That's the opposite signal of take protein out of the muscle and break it down to provide energy. So if we're putting plenty of protein in, we're constantly telling the body to put it into the muscle. And therefore, the body is more likely to make the decision to take the energy from the fat stores, which is what we want, because if you break down muscle and you lose muscle, then your metabolism will decrease as a result of that. So what we suggest is to have a primary protein source in every meal. So in breakfast, in lunch, and in dinner, to have a primary protein source. What we class as a primary protein source is a food that is very high in protein alone and not really any other macronutrients. It doesn't really contain carbs, it doesn't really contain fats, it's just very high in protein. So that's things like chicken, fish, Greek yogurt, tofu, eggs, the list goes on. And we want you to have one of those in every meal. Now, in the UK in general, we're very good at doing that for our evening meal. We're okay-ish at doing that for lunch, but we're not so good at doing that for breakfast. We tend to eat things like cereal and toast and things like that for breakfast, which is predominantly just carbs and doesn't really contain any protein. So what we want you to do is make sure that in your breakfast especially, but all of your meals, that you're having one of those primary protein sources. So things like Greek yogurt or eggs for breakfast. We then have secondary protein sources, or we sometimes call them protein additions, which are foods that are high in protein, but they are also high in a different macronutrient. So it might be carbohydrates, it might be fats. So with beans and lentils, for example, they're high in protein and carbs, and in cheese and milk, they're high in protein, but also in fats. We say add those to meals to boost the protein content, but you should still be getting your main protein source from your primary protein source. And then you can add those foods to snacks as well to try and boost the protein content of snacks. So that's protein. So the energy deficit needs to come from somewhere. We've just said to you, you need to eat more protein. So where is this energy deficit going to come from? The safest place to take energy from your diet is from carbohydrates. So that's to take that away so that you're putting less energy into your body. The reason that we aren't suggesting to take energy away from fats is because fats are extremely important for health, especially unsaturated fats. Lots of our hormones like estrogen and progesterone are made from fats. And so very low fat diets can lead to all sorts of problems and hormonal problems. And sometimes we see loss of periods in women who have been on very low fat diets for a long time. And fats also provide us with fat-soluble vitamins and help us to absorb fat-soluble vitamins, which are essential for our health. So we don't want you to eat an extremely high-fat diet, but we don't necessarily want to be decreasing the amounts of fats that you're eating. So carbohydrates do provide us with energy, but we also can get energy from fat and from protein. And we don't suggest a very low carbohydrate diet. So we are not suggesting a ketogenic diet or an extremely low carbohydrate diet or anything like that. These diets eliminate the entire food group of carbohydrates, and that is not good for health, and we don't want you to do that. Two main reasons. The first reason is that carbohydrates provide us with fiber. When we go on these diets, we get very, very, very little fiber. And as we've discussed, that can have a negative impact on our gut microbiome. You're essentially starving your gut microbiome if you're not eating fiber. Starchy carbohydrates like pasta, potatoes, rice, those kind of foods contain lots of fiber, which are essential for gut health. The second reason is that our brains need carbohydrates to function, and we don't want to take those away. So we are not eliminating carbohydrates. What we are suggesting is moderate carbohydrate restriction. And this looks different for different people. So for some people, if they're a little bit more active and they're engaged in a little bit more exercise, we would probably suggest just to remove carbohydrates from one meal per day. So they may choose that that's their lunch. So they would have carbohydrates in their breakfast, carbohydrates in their evening meal, and then they would have a low carbohydrate lunch. For people who are less active, doing less exercise, live a more sedentary lifestyle, we might suggest having 2 low carbohydrate meals per day. So that would be removing carbohydrates from maybe breakfast and lunch, and then having a portion of carbohydrates in their evening meal. Or some people find that it works well to have a half portion of carbohydrates across 2 meals. So they might have a half portion of carbohydrates in their breakfast, a low carb lunch, and a half portion of carbohydrates in their evening meal. So they're still having a small portion. We don't tell people to eliminate fruit or anything like that, or worry too much about fruits. Yes, fruits do contain carbohydrates, but really we're talking about those starchy carbohydrates that we're going to be eliminating from some meals, not all meals. And fruit and veg, we say eat in abundance. Aim for 5 a day as a minimum rather than a target, and that's not something that you would need to restrict. So they're our main principles. Obviously, there are other areas that we would look at, and they are all important when we're looking at weight loss. So these are all things that we would go in detail over with clients. So things like your fluid intake, your alcohol intake, your caffeine intake, and within that, we would be looking at your sleep and your sleep quality, because that can have a really big impact on weight loss. Your exercise and your activity, and then finally the type of fat that you are intaking. So does your fat mainly come from saturated sources? Does it mainly come from unsaturated sources? And obviously what we want is to have that high unsaturated to low saturated fat intake. So I am just going to leave you with some handy hints. So my main sort of takeaway points from this, and some extra little handy hints, are to try swapping out half of your normal portion of carbs for a portion of something like pulses. So that might be making butter bean mashed potatoes. So you can mash the beans and the potatoes so that you'd only be using half of the amount of potato. You could half your amount of rice, but add peas into it to bulk it out and make it the same volume as what a full portion of rice would be. The second hint is to try portioning out large bags of things like nuts, bars of chocolate, share bags of chocolate, share bags of crisps, things like that. If you are the kind of person who gets in from work and just sticks your hand into a share bag of chocolate or something like that, then one way that you can really, really help yourself with that is when you're home from shopping, when you're unpacking your shopping bags, when you're in that moment, portion things out. So if you've bought a block of chocolate, portion that out into rows and put them in individual bags or in pots or something like that. So yes, you might get home and you might grab for something, but actually you might grab for 1 row of chocolate rather than half a bar of chocolate if you were to do that. The third is to obviously make sure you have a decent protein source in all 3 of your main meals. And the real take home one is to make sure you're having a protein source in breakfast. And finally, if you find fruit and veg boring, or if you find that you're someone who doesn't really like fruit and veg very much, or you kind of tend to find that you go shopping and you pick up the same fruit and veg every time, and you just always buy the same things and you're making the same meals, switch things up, try something different, try fruit and veg that you don't normally buy, whether that's mangoes or pineapple or all the different multicolored carrots, and just try having something new and buying different fruit and veg each week, especially in summer. Buy things that are in season and see if that helps to increase your fruit and veg intake. So that is everything from me on the nutrition side. What I'm going to do now is hand you over to Beth, our clinical hypnotherapist. I'm going to mute myself and let Beth unmute herself.
Done. Hello, thanks for that, Katie. Do you want to pop it onto the first slide for me? Okay, so first thing I want to kind of talk through is, what is hypnotherapy? There's a lot of misconceptions out there, and we've got kind of people like Darren Brown and Paul McKenna to thank for that. And probably we've all been on those holidays as well, where we had that hypnotherapist on the stage and they were doing something a little bit strange. Obviously, hypnotherapy is pretty much worlds away from that. So hypnotherapy is a kind of guided program where you will be taken into a relaxed state and you'll be looking to focus inward rather than outward. Now, quite a nice little visual way that I can describe this to you is that we all have like a beam of consciousness. So I want you to think about when you just like you are now, you can look around the room, you can take in quite a lot of information. Your beam of consciousness is quite wide. Now, when we come into a hypnotic state, what happens is that beam of consciousness becomes much more concentrated. It becomes like a laser beam of focus. And obviously we have closed eyes as well. So that laser beam of consciousness comes into a really focused state within, rather than as kind of being bombarded with all of the information that we get bombarded with on a daily basis. Now, what that allows us to do with bringing that conscious state from such a big place into a small place, it allows us to really kind of create, I like to think of it as like a bridge between the conscious mind and the subconscious mind. Now, your subconscious mind is the kind of place that runs the show, really, and I'll talk to you a little bit more about that as we go on. But just coming into what hypnotherapy is, it really is a relaxed state bringing you into a focused state, and that's where we can create change. Now, can everyone be hypnotized? And the answer is yes. And we are all hypnotized on a daily basis. Now, hypnosis, being hypnotized, is something that happens to us all every day. Again, quite a nice example of this is we've all been to the cinema, and we've all been kind of walked into the cinema, and again, our beam of consciousness is taking in quite a few different things. People eating popcorn next to us, and we can kind of see what the seats look like and see how many people are sat around us. Now, when that movie comes on, we go into a hypnotic state because we stop taking in all of that information, and we all just focus on that one kind of thing that's happening, and we start to perhaps feel the emotions of the characters on the screen. And that's kind of very much like a hypnotic state, very focused. Now, it doesn't have to just be at the cinema. We can be reading an engrossing book, or we can be watching the television at home and we can be engrossed, or even our phones, really. That's something that we kind of get hypnotized by quite a lot. And in terms of kind of levels of hypnosis, the rough guide is that there are about 10% of the population that are really highly susceptible to go into a deep hypnotic state, about 10% of the population who go into a much, much lighter hypnotic state, and then the rest of us just sit somewhere in the middle of those. Now, how it will feel for each person is quite an individual experience, really. At the least, it will be just a nice, very relaxing kind of feeling. Some people are able to really follow what the hypnotherapist is saying to them. Other people dip in and dip out depending on kind of that kind of conscious level that they go to. But another thing to say about hypnotherapy as well is all hypnosis is self-hypnosis. And what that means is you are choosing and taking yourself into that more relaxed state. The person that you go and visit, the hypnotherapist, such as myself, is there to simply act as a guide. And obviously I would use therapeutic words with you and therapeutic tools, but I am there as a guide, and it's you that is actually allowing yourself to go into that hypnotic state. So everyone definitely can be hypnotized. Obviously, people that really don't want to be won't be, but people that are open-minded to it will be as well. So that's kind of covering a little bit of common misconceptions there, but just things like you not being in control, I think, is a really, really important thing here. And you're always in control of that situation. You decide, as it's you who is being hypnotized, who's you allowing that hypnosis to happen, can decide about what kind of level you go to with that hypnosis. And it's not about somebody else taking any control over you. Next slide, please. So how can hypnotherapy help? Well, hypnotherapy can help with a really, really big, broad range of topics. But today, obviously, we're focusing in on some very specific ones. So in terms of behaviour change, it's very difficult for us to change our behaviours because we try and change our behaviours in the conscious mind, forgetting completely about the subconscious mind, not forgetting about it, but it's very difficult for us to go down and change what's happened or what's been laid down in our subconscious mind. So we try and use this lovely term called willpower. And we use this term called willpower to kind of beat ourselves with a stick. So we've all been there. Monday morning, I'm going to be good today. And we say this word to ourselves, I'm going to be good, I'm going to be good. Gets to 3-4 o'clock, the day has been terrible, we're absolutely knackered. What are we going to do? We want to reach for that biscuit tin. Okay, it's Tuesday, I'm going to be good today, or Wednesday, I'm going to be good today. And then after that comes that shameful feeling, those feelings of guilt, those feelings where we just basically degrade ourselves from saying, I was going to be good, but I wasn't able to do it. And that's because we're relying on that conscious part of our brain to do the work. Now, especially when it comes to things like weight loss and food, we have used food in this country for punishment and reward for a long time. And we've also got a lot of social conditioning from our parents, from our friends, from the television, from adverts, etc., etc. And that means that we find it very difficult to change those behaviours. And again, that's because they all sit in the conscious part of our mind. Now, how hypnotherapy works is it can find where the beginning of these behaviours happened, whether that's related to either a traumatic event or just a really simplistic event. And it can go back and it can help us to release those kind of either memories that need to be released, or find that incident that happened, and we go back and we can change that behavior. And we do that by giving that behavior a job upgrade, as I like to call it. So you never want to get rid of something, but you do want to change something. And that's because we want to create what's called a new pathway in our mind. So for instance, we would see an advert on the television, and the advert would be of a family and they're going out for a lovely picnic, and the sun's shining and it's a beautiful day, and you can pretty much almost smell those wildflowers as you're watching it. And that family is having like a big picnic, and there's loads and loads of cakes in that picnic. Now, you're going to get a feeling of nostalgia from that because perhaps you had that kind of memory from when you were a child, or you can relate to that memory. And you're going to be looking at that food and you're going to be thinking, oh my God, it's that cake that's giving me those feelings of love. Well, actually, no, what those feelings are coming from are those memories of those times together with family and friends. They're going to kind of be those emotions, but we are going to associate it with food. Now, it's about finding different associations, and it's about finding different ways that we can get those feelings that food has kind of given us, or how we've been taught that food can give us. And that's in particular with behavior change and weight loss. Now, with things like self-worth and self-esteem, well, again, using a bit of a broad overview here, especially women, we tend to speak to ourselves in not very kind ways. We can definitely know that we have spoken to ourselves when we look in the mirror. We'll be picking out all of the bad things first of all. Now, what happens when we do that is we are constantly giving ourselves a feedback loop. So we perhaps say to ourselves, I'm so fat, as an example, I'm so fat, I'm so fat, I'm so fat. Now, what happens is your subconscious mind just constantly hears that it's fat and it's fat and it's fat. And so the actions that it then takes, for instance, seeing that chocolate and just wanting to devour it, is the action it takes as if it wants to stay as a person who is fat, because we keep telling it that's the person that it is. Now, we want to kind of get a break, we want to break in that matrix, and we want to start changing how we speak to ourselves and replaying that cycle into a positive way. And this is where hypnotherapy can come in and help you to find that way to break, to stop yourself from having those initial kind of negative comments about yourself. And we do this through things like visualization and through repetition, which I'm going to go on to in a moment. But that's just a kind of a quick 3 ways that hypnotherapy can help with those kind of topics. Katie, if you could, next slide, please. Okay, so, and this is where hypnotherapy in day-to-day life comes in. Visualizations are a really, really amazing tool. So we're going to be speaking as well about learning self-hypnosis, and that's going to be in my handy hints, but visualizations comes into that. So one thing that's really, really useful to do is to bring something into the present time as if it's happening now. So we'd find a nice relaxed state for ourselves, whether that's we just literally sit down, breathe in and out 3 times and close our eyes, and then visualize ourselves in that perfect outfit, visualize ourselves at the perfect weight that we want to be, that we choose for ourselves, and visualize it if it's happening now. And the reason why we do this is because your subconscious mind does not know the difference between fantasy and reality. So we give it the fantasy, we give ourselves that fantasy, we allow all of those emotions to be created, just like we saw on that television screen when that family were having that picnic. No, now we're giving it that visualization and that kind of almost like a television screen of us being at that perfect weight, and we allow all of those emotions to almost be imprinted onto our subconscious mind. And then guess what happens? Your subconscious mind then moves to act in ways that creates that for you. So that's how we use visualization. Now, from that visualization, you can almost create a mantra. Now, I'm going to come back to something that Katie said, because she obviously was talking about handy hints. And she was saying, if you're somebody who reaches for the chocolate tin and you come in and you kind of want to devour it all, rather than doing that, you would break it up into those little pieces, into those little boxes. Now, this is where things like mantra come in, because rather than thinking like, oh, I feel so restricted because I can't eat all of this chocolate, you can be saying to yourself, I feel satisfied with X amount of chocolate that I'm eating, and I feel satisfied, and repetition. And this allows your brain to think, actually, yeah, I do feel satisfied by that. And you have to say it a couple of times, and that starts to become your reality. You can back that up then with things like Post-it notes. So putting those mantras that you create for yourself onto those treat boxes, putting Post-it notes in places where you see them all the time, perhaps on your mirror. So if your first kind of reaction when you see yourself in the morning is to be like, oh, you know, Post-it note on there, say something you like about yourself. Training yourself to move away from that negative response, training yourself to move into how you see yourself in a positive response. Guess what happens? Your body then works in a way to take you into acting like somebody who is very healthy, eats healthily, and is satisfied by those healthy meals. Next slide, please. Okay, so I've touched on this already, but what is self-hypnosis? So as I already said, all hypnosis is self-hypnosis, but what I mean in particular by this is, what is self-hypnosis that you can do by yourself at home? So you're not going to guide it, you've not got a guide there such as myself, you can do it for yourself. Now on the handy hints page, I have put down a couple of ideas, but I'm going to go through those now as well. So doing self-hypnosis really just means creating a nice little relaxed kind of state for yourself. So changing your state of consciousness. Again, that can be so simple as to sit down, breathe in and out 3 times. It can be a couple of the examples that I'm going to give you in a moment, but it's basically taking yourself into that relaxed state and then using that visualization. So I used the example earlier of visualizing yourself in that favorite outfit at your favorite weight, but it can be used for a myriad of things. So you've got a big promotion coming up at work, or you want a promotion, you want a pay rise, you've got a difficult conversation with a friend, any of these things, and you can use that relaxed state. You then use your visualization of it happening in a perfect way, as if it's happening right now. You allow that to be then imprinted onto your subconscious mind, and then off you go. So it's a very, very simple tool. It can be done within 5 minutes, taking yourself into a relaxed state, creating a visualization for something that you want to create change in, imagining it as if it's happening now, and then allowing yourself to then open your eyes and continue with your day and just notice all of those positive changes. So in terms of what it's used for, it can be pretty much used for anything that you want to see change in with your life. The more you practice it, obviously the better it will be, the more you'll be able to go into it, and the more you'll be able to go into those relaxed states even more easily, even in busy, noisy rooms as well. But at first, when you're trying to practice this, I would always recommend doing it in a really, really quiet space. Next slide, please. Okay, so what else can hypnosis be used for? So, or hypnotherapy rather, can be used for as well. So we have got motivation to exercise down here. Now, motivation to exercise can be, again, a very complex area. For example, you might have been told as a child, oh, you're not very good at sports. It could have happened when you were 5 years old, could have been at sports day, and someone said to you, you're terrible at sports. And that will have stayed with you somewhere in those recesses of your mind, because our mind is almost like a little filing cabinet, and it keeps these lovely little snippets for us. And then we kind of build on that, and we almost create evidence for that. And as you go through life, might have created evidence about why you're bad at sports or why you don't like exercise, and that can stay with you going forward. Now, hypnosis can then help you to take you into those relaxed states to find out where those thought processes about yourself, or those beliefs about yourself began, releasing those beliefs, and then allow space so that you can then create new beliefs for yourself as well. Motivation to exercise might not come from something like that. It might just simply be that you haven't found a kind of type of exercise that you like. But moving the body is so innate in all of us. So we can help find out what's kind of stopping with that. Now, motivation to exercise might also be linked to pain management. So for some people who have had an injury, as long as it's not an acute injury, it's happening at the moment. Some people have had kind of historic injuries, and that pain has kind of stayed with them. Hypnotherapy can help with that as well. It can help you practice to move the pain out of the body. So for example, you can, if you've got a headache, you can almost imagine go into hypnotic state, so you can be relaxed, go into a relaxed state, and imagine then in front of you is a balloon. And then you can imagine with breathing that you're almost breathing out that headache into the balloon, and you're visualizing that balloon getting bigger. And as that balloon gets bigger and bigger, so your headache gets smaller and smaller, reduces even more. And in that lovely state of hypnosis, you can then imagine letting go of that balloon and taking that headache away. Now, obviously, a headache can be quite a transitory thing, but those kind of tools can be used with different kinds of pain as well. So those two can be linked, that pain management, obviously motivation to exercise. Then coming on to anxiety as well. Again, anxiety is a very complex area. For some people, there's low levels of anxiety that are there all the time. For others, anxiety can be something that comes and goes. Hypnosis can help, or hypnotherapy can help with this by finding out what's the cause of that anxiety, where does it come from? And you might be surprised to find it comes from something that you hadn't even thought about for such a long time. And it can work on tools for allowing you to take control of your anxiety and to stop anxiety controlling you. And again, that can then lead on to more motivation to move the body as well. Next slide, please. Okay, so finally coming on to those handy hints. So writing a list of non-food related rewards that satisfy you, e.g. hot bath or walk somewhere beautiful. Now with that one, I would say, again, going into a nice relaxed state before you do that as well. And again, I keep coming back to this relaxed state, but it's about that sense of focus. It's stopping all of the noise that we hear all every day, and just bringing that sense of focus back in, so you can really kind of listen to what your body wants. Number 2 is a place to post-it notes somewhere. I did already touch on that already, but by your bed. Now, the reason why I say this is to start the day and end the day with this. Now, I've put an example here with, I am satisfied with my 3 healthy meals and 2 snacks a day, and repeating that to yourself. I am satisfied with that. So moving from restricted mindset of, oh, I just want to eat everything, to coming into, no, I'm satisfied with these really, really healthy, nourishing meals, and repeating that at the beginning and the end of your day. And that's because those first few moments when you open your eyes in the morning are some of the most important moments of the day, because they can kind of set you up, they set your mindset up for the whole day. So if you open your eyes and you instantly think to yourself, oh, I've got so much to do today, then that's just going to have that knock-on effect for the rest of the day. But if you have that positive mantra, that one of the first things that you see when you open your eyes and you instantly think of that mantra, it can change so much about everything about your day. And again, looking at something before you go to bed, then that also stays with you as well. Putting a post-it note on the mirror, as I discussed earlier. So trying to, for the first thing that you say to yourself when you see yourself, is something that you like about yourself, rather than something that you don't like. Yeah, sure, you might follow up with something that you don't like, because that takes some training to stop ourselves from doing that. But just if you can start the process of that first thing you say being something that you like about yourself, and it's going to make a massive difference. And then finally, you can use alarms on the phone if post-it notes aren't for you as well. So perhaps setting some alarms up throughout the day, so you can start those mantras, visualizations, and those positive things to say to yourself. Okay, so that's everything from me, and I'm now going to mute myself and hand you over to Harriet.
Hello, so I've just unmuted myself. Thank you so much for that, Bethan and Katie. I think we've had some really helpful tips and sort of, ways to kind of improve our eating, really. I know a lot of those things apply to me, and it's hard to sometimes make those changes, which is why it's often, helpful to get that support. So yeah, my name's Harriet. I'm one of the doctors from the Calla Clinic, and I'm going to talk to you a bit about the National Medical Weight Loss Clinic that we run. So basically, I'm going to start by letting you know a bit about what the actual National Medical Weight Loss Programme is. So can I have the next slide, please? So many of you probably haven't heard of this, but basically the National Medical Weight Loss Programme was launched in 2019. And the purpose of that programme was to educate and train healthcare professionals to offer weight loss clinics across the country, where we provide prescription-based medication alongside sort of lifestyle and modification to really help people lose weight who have struggled really through other means, and may want to get that bit healthier. And get this sort of overall sort of goal of this program is to try and improve our overall health, because obviously when we're thinking about obesity, we're thinking about being overweight, we worry about what effects that will have, for example, on your cardiovascular health and other aspects of your life. So yeah, that's basically what the National Medical Weight Loss Programme is. So can I have the next slide, please? So what I'm going to talk about, first of all, before going into the medical treatment that we offer, I thought I'd just describe or explain to you a little bit about how our appetite is actually regulated. So our appetite and our feelings of hunger are very complicated. They're kind of formulated through the sort of interaction of lots of different factors. So whether that's our hormones, sort of nerve transmission to the brain from the rest of our body. So I'm just going to really explain it in a very basic, simple way, just so you can understand a little bit more about the medication and treatment that we offer and how that might work. So basically, one of the hormones that are released in our body is something called ghrelin. And basically, ghrelin is a hormone that's released by your stomach. So when your stomach is empty, or if it's coming up to your normal meal time, your stomach will release lots of this hormone, and that will then signal to your brain, so a part of the brain called the hypothalamus, to get you to find food sources, basically. So it'll tell your brain that you're hungry, you need to go and look for some food, and that's when you start to get those hunger pains and feel hungry. So it's often known as the hunger hormone. We've also got a hormone that does the opposite to that. So there's a hormone called leptin, and leptin is actually produced by our fat cells. And what leptin will do is then signal to your brain and say, we don't need any more food. We've got plenty of fat deposited throughout our body, and therefore we don't need to worry about finding food sources. Therefore, people who are overweight or obese will actually produce a lot more leptin than other people. And the reason for that is obviously you've got more fat laid down throughout your body. So it normally should be the case that because you've got more leptin produced, you don't actually feel as hungry as somebody else who may have less fat. However, studies have shown that actually people who struggle with their weight and struggle with obesity are resistant to leptin. So although their body could be producing lots of it, their brain doesn't receive the signal, and the brain doesn't then understand that you aren't hungry and that you don't need to eat. So then you've got this sort of uncontrolled appetite, and it can make it very difficult for you to sort of use lifestyle factors alone to lose weight. And then one of the other hormones that I'm just going to mention is something called glucagon-like peptide. And that's produced by your small intestine and your colon, and it's also produced in your pancreas. And this hormone is produced when your stomach is full. So when you've just had a meal and there's lots of food that's gone into your digestive tract, your tract will naturally produce this hormone. And the role of that hormone is to then tell your stomach to slow down, so to slow right down and to stop emptying so rapidly. And what it'll also do is control your glucose levels by increasing your insulin. Now, this may not mean a whole lot to you, but when I come on to sort of the medication that we can offer you, we use this hormone to then control your appetite. Could I have the next slide, please? So in the clinic, what we do is prescribe a medication called Ozempic. Now, this is not a first line treatment for somebody who hasn't really tried other methods of losing weight. It's really there for patients or people who have had difficulty despite changing aspects in their lifestyle, like your diet, increasing exercise, but have still struggled to reach that healthy target weight. So Ozempic is a medication that is injected. So you actually inject it yourself once a week. So you'll inject it into sort of fatty areas, so either your tummy, your leg, or your arm. And what it will do is actually bind to the receptors of the hormone glucagon-like peptides. And that will then signal to your stomach to slow down. So it will delay your gastric emptying. And that means that you're going to feel full a lot easier. So a lot of patients, when they start this medication, will simply feel full before they've even eaten anything. And they have to try and sort of make themselves eat small meals throughout the day so that you're still going to get that your nutritional needs. Because obviously, like we've spoken about earlier, we don't want to completely eradicate aspects of your diet, and we don't want you to go into a nutritional deficit. But what you'll find is you'll eat much smaller quantities of food and you'll feel full so much quicker. So that means that you can get that energy deficit and you can burn a lot more sort of fat than you would have done without this medication. And at the same time, you want to be making sure you're following, obviously, the advice we've spoken about earlier, so that you're still eating really nutrient dense foods and you're still looking after your overall health, because we don't want to deplete yourself of those vital nutrients and minerals. So once you inject it once a week, we normally then, when we first initially see you, sort of come up with a bit of a plan and sort of discuss what your sort of healthy weight would be. And then you will start that treatment once a week, and we'll review you regularly in clinic. And then we'll come up to a point where you're, making progress, you're reaching your target weight. And at that point, that's when we can start thinking about reducing that dose very slowly. And there are a handful of patients that may continue this medication in the long term, and studies have shown that it's perfectly safe to continue in the long term should you need to. However, obviously our goal really is to manage things without this. So what we say, it's kind of like a tool for you to add in alongside the other things you're doing in your lifestyle to try and get you to that healthy point, so that you can then focus more on those lifestyle changes. And that means that when you actually reduce the Ozempic medication, you feel really well prepared, you've got really good habits, and you can continue with your healthy sort of weight management. Next slide, please. So who is suitable for Ozempic? So obviously it is a prescribed medication, and not everybody can have this medication, whether that's because you've got certain medical problems, or you've got certain medications that you take, or you may not fulfill, the criteria based on your current weight. So we've got to be very careful who we prescribe this to. So our minimum criteria to receive this treatment would be that you have at least tried other methods of weight loss, whether that's through change to your diet, change to your exercise for a good period of time, and you've still failed to reach a healthy sort of target weight. So that's the first thing. Secondly, we have to go on your BMI measurements. So that's your body mass index, which can be quite a crude way of measuring your weight, but it can be helpful in these sort of cases. So you have to have a BMI of at least 27 or more, or you have to have a BMI of 25 or more, but you have some comorbidities relating to your weight. So whether that's, for example, a heart problem, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, diabetes. So they're the types of things that would mean you could have this medication at a lower BMI. We also look at your waist circumference, because your waist circumference is really important when we're looking at your cardiovascular risk. So anybody that just sort of deposits fat centrally around their tummy are at much higher risk of developing cardiovascular disease than people who put that weight around other parts of the body. So if you've got a particularly high waist circumference, you may also fit that criteria for treatment. Whenever we sort of speak to a patient who's interested in this treatment, we will always perform a really thorough consultation. So we'll take a full medical history. We'll make sure you haven't got any family history of certain conditions that mean you can't have this treatment. We'll make sure we know about your medications, and also other lifestyle factors like alcohol intake, because that can also affect whether you could have this medication. In some cases, we may also then recommend performing some blood tests. And the reason for that is we like to know what your baseline kidney and liver functions are. We like to know what your lipids are doing. And that's helpful to make sure that we're not giving you a dose that could be detrimental, you know, to your kidneys or liver. So they're sort of things we have to do to consider whether you would be suitable for this treatment. Generally speaking, it's a very effective, safe treatment. Now, at the moment, it's not currently licensed for the purpose of weight loss in the UK. So that doesn't mean that it's not a safe medication to have for weight loss, but actually it's historically been used to treat patients with type 2 diabetes. It was then found that it had a very beneficial effect on these patients losing weight. And there's been large studies performed across the US that show the efficacy of this treatment when used alongside lifestyle modification in helping people maintain weight loss and keeping that weight off, because obviously that's what's important. We don't want you to suddenly have a weight loss that isn't sustainable. But actually the licensing for it in the UK to be used for weight loss is going to be coming in probably this year actually. And when that happens, it's actually going to be available on the NHS. However, the criteria for this treatment on the NHS is a lot stricter. So to have the to be eligible for the treatment on the NHS, your BMI is going to need to be about 34 or over. So that means a significant proportion of patients who suffer with their weight won't be able to get that treatment through the NHS. And that's where we can be helpful. So for patients that would still like help with this medication, you can come to see us in clinic and we can often, you know, talk through that process and help you with that. In terms of sort of what to expect, you will experience side effects initially. Now, some people experience those effects more frequently than others, but the reason that happens is that we are slowing down the way that your tummy empties. So you're going to feel really full, and what can happen is you can get a bit of nausea and you can feel sick. Some patients in extreme cases may also experience vomiting. The other thing that can happen is, so although it slows your stomach down, it actually increases your colon. So you can also get a bit of diarrhea initially because of that increased movement and contraction of your large intestine. Other side effects as well can be that you just feel a little bit lethargic and fatigued initially. But generally speaking, after the first couple of weeks, these side effects are minimized and you become used to this treatment. So you don't normally feel sick constantly, you know, for the weeks throughout treatment, but it's just that initial adjustment period really. But we've had a lot of patients who have really found this treatment helpful, and you know, it's made a massive difference to them reaching that healthy weight. And the key for us is trying to reduce those comorbidities. So we've had patients who have been on this treatment and then subsequently their blood pressure has gone within normal limits. Their heart rate has settled, and they've seen a lot of benefits through their overall health. So that's just a quick run through really of what Ozempic is and how it may be able to help you. So if you have any questions, obviously we've got a Q&A at the end, so please let me know. Thank you.
Harriet, do you mind if I just really quickly touch on something about ghrelin using your slide? Is that
yeah,
okay?
Of course. Yeah,
so I'm just going to go, it's that slide. I was just literally going to really quickly touch on it just because you talked about ghrelin. So as a very quick and simplistic overview, I mentioned obviously at the start of my talk about fad diets and why fad diets don't work, and the fact that when we go on these fad diets, we actually then normally end up regaining the weight afterwards, and therefore we conclude from that that diet didn't work. So, you know, you hear about the Atkins diet and keto diets and all different kinds of fad diets. And one of the reasons why they don't work is to do with this hormone called ghrelin. So as Harriet explained, when the stomach is empty and you feel hungry, it's because you've released this hormone called ghrelin. And that's telling your brain that you're hungry, your stomach starts rumbling, and it makes you want to eat food. What studies show is that when people go on very restrictive diets, so we're talking sort of, you know, 800 to 1,000 calories or less, or diets that cut entire food groups out of the diet, we find that ghrelin levels massively increase. They go through the roof. Your ghrelin is high all the time, which is why when you go on these diets, you feel hungry all the time, or things like shake diets and meal replacements and things like that. So they study these people, they study their ghrelin levels throughout the time that they're on these fad diets or these very, very restrictive diets, and they find that they increase hugely. What some studies have then done is to tell people to eat normally again, or to put people back onto the number of calories that they were on before they went on the diet. And before the diet, these people reported that they felt quite satisfied with their food intake and that they were eating to their hunger levels. What these studies find, up to 12 months after coming off one of these fad diets, is that ghrelin levels are still higher than they were before the person goes on the diet, which means as a result of that, the person after they've come off the diet feels hungrier than they did before they went on the diet, even though they're eating the same amount of food. That causes the person to regain all of their weight that they've lost. And normally it causes the person to then regain a little bit more weight from before they went on the diet. So the reason that we say these diets don't work, because sometimes people say, oh, well, you know, I did do this shake diet and it did work at the time because I did lose the weight, but then I put it all back on again and I put on more. We say, well, actually, no, that diet that you went on in the first place is the reason why your weight is now increased compared to where it was before you went on the diet. And a lot of people will go round in these cycles where they'll go on a fad diet, they'll regain the weight then a little bit more, then they'll go on another one, they'll regain the weight and a little bit more. And what we actually see over a 5-year period is that weight has slowly increased and increased and increased. Whereas if that person had never gone on that fad diet in the first place, their weight would have likely remained a lot more stable. So I just wanted to touch on that and to just touch on just how dangerous they can be, and why a more sort of holistic approach where you're looking at your diet, where you're looking at your lifestyle, where you're maybe looking at medical weight loss and things like that in combination with each other can set people up for much more long-term success. So what I'm going to do is just stop sharing my screen. And if anybody has any questions, I'll check the chat box. Can't see anything in the chat box at the moment. Please feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question if you want to. I'll just stop talking and give people a minute if they want to ask any questions.
No one wants to be the first, do they?
I know. I actually had a question for you, Beth, if that's
okay. Go.
It's not really related to weight loss, but when you said about the mind not knowing the difference, the subconscious mind not knowing the difference between reality and fantasy, or I can't remember what term you use, that was really interesting. I didn't realize that. And I wondered, is that why when you have dreams, sometimes you have the most boring dream where you get in the car and go to work, and then sometimes you have a dream that you're like in an alternate universe or something like that?
Yeah, and it can kind of, you know, we've all had those dreams where something horrible's happened and you kind of looking at your husband and think, you did something in my dream last night, and you kind of feel like it feels real. And that's because, you know, it's because of that kind of not knowing the difference between fantasy and reality. Works for the good and for the bad in some ways.
So we have a question. If I struggle with comfort eating, what approach to weight loss would be best for me? Would I be best doing the hypnotherapy or the nutrition or the injections? I don't know. I suppose that's kind of one for us all to answer. I don't know if Beth, you want to touch on that a little bit.
Yeah, I think with I think that kind of problem with comfort eating is a really interesting one, and this is where hypnotherapy comes into its own, really, because where does that come from? We all of our behaviours have come from a positive intention. So whether you're a smoker, a drinker, eat too much, whatever you do too much of, shall we say, it always comes from a positive intention, and it's just the behavior at the end that obviously isn't, unfortunately, leading to a positive result. So where hypnotherapy can come in is to find where or what that original positive intention is and what else we can do to satisfy that positive intention. So again, looking for those different ways that you can find satisfaction without it being, you know, the drinking, smoking, eating, whatever you kind of do. And so I would definitely say that hypnotherapy is great with comfort eating to find the original source, release those kind of feelings of whatever that stemmed from, recognize that it came from a positive intention, find out what the positive intention is, and then find a different way or a different behavior that can satisfy that positive intention.
Harriet, is that something you come across?
Yeah, I would agree with Beth, actually. I think for me, actually addressing perhaps some of the sort of psychological aspects of the comfort eating would be my first sort of port of call, really, purely because Ozempic's fantastic. It can mean that you don't crave the sugar, you don't crave those things that you perhaps turn to for the comfort. But I think if you can kind of address that underlying root cause that's happening psychologically, you're going to get more benefit in the longer term. And I think for me, that would be the first step I would recommend, actually. And then if you're still struggling after that, then it may be worth looking at the Ozempic as well. But I don't think I would recommend the Ozempic as the first sort of, you know, treatment option to go for that type of eating.
Yeah, and I mean, from a nutrition point of view as well, to an extent, comfort eating, but also things like binge eating, which we do see sometimes as well, having a good nutrition education and making sure that meals are satisfying and balanced, it can really help with that. So what we teach clients to do is, if they are having a meal that does contain carbohydrates, for example, being able to look at that plate of food and being able to be confident to point out, what is my protein source, what is my fat source, what is my carbohydrate source. Tell yourself a reason why you need each one of those things and what that does for you in your body, and the fact that that meal therefore ticks all 3 boxes of everything that you need, and that can help you to feel satisfied as well. So it can help, you know, just feeling a little bit more satisfied throughout the day, rather than, you know, if you're just constantly reaching for sugary snacks, then you're just going to constantly have these peaks and troughs of feeling really hungry and then having a sugar rush and then feeling really hungry again. So it can help from that point of view as well, if that makes sense.
I just wanted to follow up actually as well with something that you know, kind of can probably come from all 3 of us, but in particular from my hypnotherapy, is that a lot of people feel like they have to be all or nothing. So there's a packet of biscuits in the house, I'm going to nail it, or I can't have anything in the house, I can't have any treats. Now that's not reality, and also it's not a very nice kind of way to go forward. And so what kind of thing that we want to teach them, especially with the nutrition and hypnotherapy, is that you are able to be satisfied by having a small amount of everything. Everything is available to you. It shouldn't be a case of all or nothing. And again, that's it's kind of a societal thing, or maybe something your parents have said or something like that that's come along. But a lot of people hold this belief really strongly that they can't have anything in the house, or they can't see cakes, or they can't do any of those things because it's so many triggers for them. But it's about re-educating yourself, and really from a subconscious level up, in that you are allowed to have nice things to eat and drink. It's just about the fact that you then will learn that you don't need to have them all, and that kind of feeds in again to that punishment and reward thing again. Almost, you know, if you've had a little bit of it, you feel ashamed, so I better get rid of it. It's almost like hiding the evidence, you know, and it's about that re-education from the ground up.
Yeah, and just to finish that on that as well, is we never ever tell people you can never eat chocolate, or you can never have biscuits in the house, or anything like that. We actually think that it's really important that those foods are still incorporated into your diet and are still a part of your diet, just in a much more moderate way. Do you have any questions from anybody else? You can either pop yourself off mute, or you can pop them into the chat box. So someone said that they are vegan, and can they still follow a high protein diet to help with weight loss, or do they need a different approach? Nope, you can still get a high protein diet on a vegan diet. That's something that, you know, we've done with many people. Obviously it's just opting for those plant-based sources instead, especially now. It's so easy to do because you can get everything. You know, years and years ago it was kind of tofu and then maybe beans and pulses and things like that, whereas now you can buy vegan protein yogurt, you can buy vegan protein powder, you can buy vegan protein bars, you can buy vegan everything, and you know, different sort of meat replacements and things like that, if that's something that you enjoy. So it's absolutely possible to get enough protein on a vegan diet. Definitely, doesn't have to be a problem. And then we had another question for you, Harriet. How long can I stay on Ozempic for?
So with Ozempic, there's not actually a minimum time, or maximum time, sorry, that you can stay on it for. So you can literally stay on it for the rest of your life, so long as you won't developing any other problems that meant you had to come off the medication. So it's actually completely safe to continue in the long term. And a lot of patients with diabetes have been on this medication for years and years and have had no problems whatsoever. Generally speaking, I like to review at sort of 12 weeks. So you'll be on the medication for 12 weeks, and then we can see how much weight loss you've achieved and kind of think about whether it's time to start, you know, reducing that dose and looking at getting you off that medication. We do have a sort of cutoff. So if you don't receive sort of to reach 5% weight loss by, I think it's 12-week periods, then we would stop the medication anyway, because clearly it's not working effectively and it's not actually doing what we want it to do. But if you find that it works for you and actually you're keeping the weight off, you're not experiencing any side effects or problems, and the financial aspect of it isn't a problem, then you can continue that for a very long time. So my mum actually has been on this medication for 2 years and she refuses to come off it. And, you know, she's found it really, really helpful for her. But obviously we need to monitor you should that be the case. And if there was any problems, you know, we would just discontinue it straight away. But actually it's very safe to continue long term.
Can I ask, Harriet, is there sort of a published percentage, or I don't know if there is, they've sort of looked at that, of people that actually it doesn't work for, and are there some people who it just doesn't work for?
That is a really good question. I don't actually know at the top of my head statistics on how many people it's ineffective for. There was the problem is, because it's been quite newly used in the field of weight loss, they don't have a lot of data from randomized controlled trials about this. So there's a big one that's being performed at the moment in the UK, which is that's going to be contributing to the fact it's going to have the license now. There's a trial that was done in the US, and there was 2,000 participants that were on Ozempic and also had lifestyle modification alongside of that, and that was compared to 2,000 participants that were having no Ozempic at all, but just the lifestyle modification. And over 64 weeks, the average sort of weight loss was 15% for patients that were on Ozempic and only 2% for people that didn't receive it at all. But unfortunately, there wasn't any data in there to show how many people that it wasn't effective for, you know, completely. So it's probably something that I'd be looking into, actually.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, but generally it's, you know, I've not come across any patients so far that it hasn't worked. Normally it's people struggling to get the balance with side effects and dosage and just starting really gradually, really.
Fab. Okie doke. So I'll just give 10-15 seconds in case anyone wants to ask any more questions.
Oh, I've got a question for you, Katie.
Go on.
So I'm quite interested in fasting, and so there's been a lot of studies that show that it's beneficial, intermittent fasting is beneficial for your cardiovascular health. And I just wondered, obviously we were talking about the effect of ghrelin, and if you're going for a long period of time without eating, what's your sort of advice or thoughts on intermittent fasting for weight loss?
So in general, from the research that I've come across, yes, there is a very strong link that intermittent fasting results in weight loss, and then obviously as a result of that we see improvements in metabolic health and you know, comorbidities if they are present. However, what the general consensus is that the reason why it works is because it puts people into a calorie deficit, because they're eating in a shorter eating period of time, so it's a shorter window that they're eating. So people tend to find it very easy to eat less in a shorter window. So some people, for example, if you're really, really not a morning person and you actually maybe struggle to stomach breakfast a little bit, and you know, you don't really find that you tend to get hungry until maybe 11 o'clock in the morning, then for those people we'd say, okay, fine, you know, you don't necessarily have to force yourself to eat at 8 o'clock in the morning. If you get hungry at 11, then eat at 11 and have a shorter eating window, and that's fine. Whereas if someone, you know, wakes up at 6 o'clock in the morning and by 6:30 they're really hungry, then I generally wouldn't recommend that they override that hunger signal and don't eat for hours, say, I don't know, till 12 o'clock or whatever, because we can find, so I work a lot with eating disorder patients, and we do find quite a lot of, what's the word, it's almost like their hunger and satiety signals don't work properly. And what we can see sometimes is if people override a hunger signal, I mean, it's not going to hurt you if you if you're hungry and you're in the car on the way from home and you don't eat for another hour, that's fine. It happens to all of us from time to time. But if somebody overrides hunger signals on a really regular basis, time and time again, what the body does is it basically says, oh, okay, this doesn't work. I'm telling you you're hungry, but you don't eat. So I'm just not going to bother anymore. And that's why when people do intermittent fasting, they generally report that with time, they get less hungry in the morning or whenever it is that they're not eating. But the problem with that is that it can then cause disruption to these hunger and satiety signals. And we can get issues where people aren't able to accurately interpret when they're hungry, and they're not accurately able to interpret when they're full. And then the other thing that I worry about with intermittent fasting is that it does really increase the risk of binging behaviors. So if someone's going for a really long period of time without eating, it makes them more likely to binge eat, which with lots of people who, well, not lots of people, but some people who have got weight to lose, they can have issues with the relationships with food and with binging and things like that. So generally, I tend to steer away from it.
No, it makes sense when you're thinking about what's going on and, you know, what impact that will have in the longer term. But I have a lot of patients asking me about that, and I've tried it myself actually. But like you say, you do go through that period of time where, you know, you're purposely avoiding eating, and it's probably not always the best thing, you know, to be doing. And actually, if you think about what you're eating and have a more healthy relationship with your food, you're going to maintain that in the longer term. It's going to be so much more sustainable, isn't it? So
exactly. And it's all about sustainability and what you can sustain long term. And I mean, if you're not meant to be eating until 12 o'clock and you're starving in a meeting at 10 o'clock in the morning and they bring cakes out, you're going to eat all the cake, aren't you?
Yeah,
starving.
Exactly.
Whereas if you've had a really nice healthy breakfast that's satiating and keeping you full, then you might be much less likely to do that. So yeah, and there's no reason why, if you're not having meals that are based a lot on fruit and veg with plenty of protein and plenty of fiber, you can't, even in a deficit, go through the whole day without feeling quite satisfied and having that across, you know, a whole day of eating window rather than a shorter period of time.
Yeah, great, thank you.
Fab. Okie doke. Well, it is 8:10, so we will let you all get back to your evenings. The link to the recording from today will be sent to you all. So I think it will be emailed. So you'll get a link to the recording so you can watch it back. And then if you did have any questions then that you didn't sort of feel comfortable to ask on here, then please do feel free to drop us an email. So my email address is nutritionist@andrahealth.com. I don't know if you two want to give your emails just so that people can ask you if they need to.
Mine is, sorry.
You go, Beth.
Sorry, mine is bethan@andrahealth.com. So that's BETHAN @andrahealth.com.
And mine is info@thecallaclinic.co.uk, and we spell Calla CALLA.
Yeah, so fab. So if you do have any questions, if you wanted to have a chat with any of us in more detail, then just pop us over an email. Otherwise, I will let you all get back to your evenings. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
And hopefully we will see you in another one.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Bye.
Take care. Bye.